Question 1. Compliance review shows that a newly formed regional transportation authority, established by intergovernmental agreement between several municipalities and funded primarily through dedicated local taxes and state grants, is seeking to implement a comprehensive risk management program. The authority's board includes elected officials from the participating municipalities and is subject to public oversight and open meeting laws. Based on the regulatory framework relevant to the ARMP exam, which of the following best defines this organization's classification for risk management purposes? Option A, a quasi-governmental agency, as it operates independently of direct municipal control but performs a public function. Option B, a public entity, as it is a governmental unit created by law to serve a public purpose and is subject to public accountability. Option C, a private nonprofit organization, due to its service-oriented mission and reliance on grants. Option D, a public-private partnership, given its intergovernmental agreement and potential for private sector involvement in operations. The correct answer is B, a public entity, as it is a governmental unit created by law to serve a public purpose and is subject to public accountability. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the risk manager to accurately interpret and apply the definition of a public entity, as it pertains to the specific regulatory framework governing the Associate in Risk Management Public Entities (ARMP) exam. Misinterpreting this fundamental definition can lead to incorrect risk management strategies, non-compliance with reporting requirements, and potentially inappropriate insurance coverage selections, all of which carry significant financial and legal implications for the public entity. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between entities that fall under the purview of public entity risk management regulations and those that do not, especially when dealing with hybrid or quasi-governmental organizations. The correct approach involves understanding that the ARMP exam's regulatory framework, which is based on U.S. state and federal laws governing public sector entities, defines a public entity as a governmental unit or agency created by law to serve a public purpose. This typically includes state governments, local governments, counties, municipalities, townships, school districts, and special districts, e.g., water, fire, transit. The key is that these entities are established by statute, are typically funded by public monies, and are accountable to the public. Therefore, an organization that is a direct subdivision of a state or local government, or a body created by statute to perform a governmental function, clearly fits this definition. An incorrect approach would be to consider any organization that receives some public funding or performs a public service as a public entity. For example, a private nonprofit organization that receives grants from a government agency while serving a public purpose is not a public entity under the typical regulatory definition for public sector risk management. It is a private entity with a public service mission. Similarly, a publicly traded company that provides a service under contract to a government agency is a private sector entity, not a public entity. These misinterpretations fail to adhere to the specific legal and regulatory definitions that delineate the scope of public entity risk management, leading to potential misapplication of specialized risk management principles and regulatory requirements designed for governmental bodies. Professionals should approach such definitional challenges by first consulting the specific statutes and regulations that define public entity within the relevant jurisdiction for the ARMP exam. This involves understanding the criteria for creation, statutory vs. contractual, funding sources, taxation vs. fees/grants, and accountability mechanisms. When in doubt, seeking clarification from legal counsel or regulatory bodies specializing in public sector governance is a prudent step to ensure accurate classification and compliance. Question 2. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a proposed settlement for a medical malpractice claim against a public hospital is significantly less than the projected cost of protracted litigation, but the claim involves a novel legal argument that could set a challenging precedent for future cases. The risk manager for the public entity must decide on the best course of action. Which of the following approaches best aligns with prudent risk management principles for public entities? Option A. Reject the settlement offer and proceed to litigation to vigorously defend against the claim and prevent the establishment of a detrimental legal precedent. Option B. Immediately accept the settlement offer to avoid any potential negative precedent, regardless of the financial implications beyond the immediate claim. Option C. Pursue a settlement that is financially advantageous in the short term, while simultaneously developing a proactive strategy to address the novel legal argument in future risk management planning and policy development. Option D. Delegate the entire decision-making authority to the hospital's legal counsel to manage the claim and any potential precedent-setting implications. The correct answer is C. Pursue a settlement that is financially advantageous in the short term, while simultaneously developing a proactive strategy to address the novel legal argument in future risk management planning and policy development. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate financial implications of a medical malpractice claim against the long-term reputational and operational stability of a public entity. The risk manager must navigate the complex interplay of legal obligations, ethical responsibilities to both the patient and the healthcare provider, and the fiduciary duty to the public entity stakeholders. The decision-making process is further complicated by the potential for significant financial exposure and the need to maintain public trust. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of the medical records, consultation with legal counsel specializing in medical malpractice defense, and engagement with the healthcare provider to understand the circumstances of the alleged negligence. This approach prioritizes a thorough investigation to determine the validity of the claim and to assess potential liability. It aligns with the ethical obligation to ensure patient safety and to respond appropriately to adverse events, as well as the regulatory requirement for public entities to manage financial risks responsibly. By gathering all relevant facts and seeking expert advice, the risk manager can make an informed decision regarding settlement, defense, or other resolution strategies that are in the best interest of the public entity and its constituents. Adhering to principles of due diligence and prudent risk management, an incorrect approach would be to immediately offer a settlement based solely on the initial demand, without a thorough investigation. This fails to uphold the duty of care to the public entity by potentially overpaying for unsubstantiated claims, and does not adhere to the principles of due process for the healthcare provider. It also risks setting a precedent for future claims, encouraging frivolous litigation. Another incorrect approach would be to rigidly deny all liability and proceed to a protracted legal battle without considering the potential for a favorable settlement. This ignores the cost-benefit analysis of litigation, which can be extremely expensive and time-consuming, and may not always result in a favorable outcome. It also fails to consider the reputational damage that prolonged litigation can inflict on the public entity and its healthcare services. A third incorrect approach would be to delegate the entire decision-making process to the legal department without active risk management oversight. While legal counsel is essential, the risk manager's role is to provide a broader perspective that includes financial, operational, and reputational considerations, ensuring that the legal strategy aligns with the overall risk management objectives of the public entity. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Immediate notification and preservation of evidence. 2. Thorough factual investigation, including review of medical records and interviews. 3. Consultation with legal and clinical experts. 4. Assessment of liability and damages. 5. Evaluation of settlement versus litigation costs and risks. And 6. Informed decision-making based on a comprehensive understanding of all factors, documented thoroughly. Question 3. Research into the development of a business impact analysis for a municipal emergency services department has revealed several potential methodologies. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework and ethical obligations for public entities in ensuring continuity of essential public services? Option A. Conducting a series of interviews with department heads to gather subjective opinions on which services are most important, without formal data collection. Option B. Systematically identifying critical public services, assessing their dependencies, quantifying potential impacts of disruption on public welfare, and establishing recovery objectives aligned with legal mandates. Option C. Focusing exclusively on the IT infrastructure supporting public services, assuming that its recovery will automatically restore all essential functions. Option D. Prioritizing functions based on their direct revenue generation potential and immediate cost savings achievable through their suspension. The correct answer is D. Prioritizing functions based on their direct revenue generation potential and immediate cost savings achievable through their suspension. Explanation: This scenario is professionally challenging because a business impact analysis, BIA, for a public entity requires a nuanced understanding of governmental functions, public trust, and the specific regulatory environment governing public services. The decision maker must balance operational continuity with fiscal responsibility and legal mandates, all while considering the potential impact on citizens. The challenge lies in prioritizing critical functions and resources within a framework that is often subject to public scrutiny and political influence, going beyond typical private sector considerations. The correct approach involves systematically identifying and prioritizing essential public services and the resources required to sustain them during and after a disruption. This includes understanding dependencies between different governmental departments and external service providers, quantifying the impact of downtime on public safety, health, and welfare, and establishing recovery time objectives, RTO, and recovery point objectives, RPO, that align with legal obligations and public expectations. This approach is ethically and regulatorily justified because public entities have a fundamental duty to provide essential services and protect public welfare. Regulatory frameworks for public entities often mandate continuity planning and disaster preparedness, emphasizing the need for a structured and comprehensive BIA to ensure resilience and minimize harm to the public. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without adequately assessing the impact on critical public services fails to meet the ethical and regulatory obligations of a public entity. This approach risks prioritizing financial savings over the safety and well-being of citizens, potentially leading to severe consequences during an emergency and violating mandates for service continuity. Another incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or the opinions of a few key individuals, rather than a systematic data-driven analysis, is professionally unacceptable. This method lacks the rigor required for a BIA, leading to inaccurate prioritization, underestimated impacts, and inadequate resource allocation. It fails to provide a defensible basis for decision-making and can result in critical functions being overlooked or inadequately protected, violating principles of due diligence and responsible governance. A third incorrect approach that neglects to consider interdependencies between different public services and external agencies creates significant blind spots. Public services are often interconnected. The failure of one can cascade and impact others. Failing to map these dependencies means the BIA will not accurately reflect the true impact of a disruption, leading to flawed recovery strategies and an inability to restore essential services effectively. This oversight is a failure in comprehensive risk assessment and planning, which is a core responsibility of public entity risk management. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve establishing a clear BIA methodology aligned with public sector best practices and relevant regulations. This includes engaging a diverse group of stakeholders from across the entity and relevant external partners, conducting thorough research and data collection, and documenting findings transparently. The process should prioritize functions based on their criticality to public health, safety, and welfare, and then develop recovery strategies that are both effective and fiscally responsible, ensuring compliance with all applicable laws and ethical standards. Question 4. To address the challenge of implementing new Governmental Accounting Standards Board (GASP) pronouncements, a public entity's risk management team is evaluating different strategies. Which of the following strategies best aligns with the principles of effective financial reporting and regulatory compliance for public entities? Option A. Delegate the primary responsibility for interpreting and implementing the new GASP standard to external auditors, minimizing internal resource allocation. Option B. Postpone the detailed assessment and implementation planning until the final months leading up to the standard's effective date to allow for maximum flexibility. Option C. Implement only the aspects of the new GASP standard that are easily adaptable and require minimal system changes, deferring more complex requirements. Option D. Proactively assess the new GASP standard's impact. Develop a detailed implementation plan with adequate resource allocation, and conduct thorough staff training well in advance of the effective date. Correct answer is D. Proactively assess the new GASP standard's impact, develop a detailed implementation plan with adequate resource allocation, and conduct thorough staff training well in advance of the effective date. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because implementing new Governmental Accounting Standards Board GASP standards often require significant changes to an entity's accounting systems, internal controls, and staff training. Public entities, with their diverse funding sources and complex operational structures, face unique hurdles in interpreting and applying these standards consistently. The pressure to maintain public trust and ensure fiscal accountability adds another layer of complexity, demanding careful judgment and a thorough understanding of the regulatory landscape. The correct approach involves proactively engaging with the new GASP standard, conducting a thorough impact assessment, and developing a detailed implementation plan. This includes identifying all affected financial statement elements, determining necessary system modifications, and allocating adequate resources for training and testing. This approach is justified by GASP Statement No. 34, Basic Financial Statements, and Management's Discussion and Analysis for state and local governments, which mandates comprehensive reporting to enhance the understandability and comparability of financial information. Adhering to this standard ensures that public entities provide transparent and accurate financial reporting, fulfilling their ethical and regulatory obligations to stakeholders. An incorrect approach of delaying the assessment and implementation until closer to the effective date poses significant risks. This can lead to rushed, incomplete, or inaccurate application of the standard, potentially resulting in material misstatements in financial reports. Such delays violate the principle of timely financial reporting and can erode public confidence. Another incorrect approach of relying solely on external auditors for interpretation and implementation guidance is also problematic. While auditors provide assurance, the primary responsibility for accurate financial reporting rests with the entity's management. Over-reliance on auditors can lead to a lack of internal expertise and ownership of the implementation process, potentially resulting in a superficial understanding and application of the standard. A further incorrect approach of implementing only the most visible or easily adaptable aspects of the standard, while neglecting more complex or resource-intensive requirements, is a direct violation of the GASP intent. This selective application undermines the comprehensive nature of the reporting framework and fails to provide stakeholders with the full picture of the entity's financial position and operations. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a proactive, systematic, and collaborative approach. This includes 1. Staying abreast of emerging GASP pronouncements, 2. Conducting a comprehensive analysis of the standard's applicability and impact, 3. Developing a detailed implementation roadmap with clear timelines and responsibilities, 4. Securing necessary resources and expertise, 5. Implementing robust internal controls to ensure compliance, and 6. Engaging in ongoing monitoring and evaluation of the implementation process. Question 5. Analysis of a scenario where a municipality, after a thorough risk assessment and budget allocation process, decided not to immediately repair a minor pothole on a low-traffic street, prioritizing more significant infrastructure projects deemed to pose a greater immediate risk to public safety. Subsequently, a cyclist sustained injuries when their bicycle struck the pothole, which defense, if successfully argued, would most effectively shield the municipality from liability for negligence. Option A, comparative negligence. Option B, discretionary function immunity. Option C, assumption of risk. Option D, sovereign immunity based solely on public entity status. Correct answer is B, discretionary function immunity. Explanation. This scenario presents a professionally challenging situation because it requires a public entity risk manager to navigate the complexities of tort law, specifically the defenses available against negligence claims, within the confines of the Associate in Risk Management Public Entities, ARMP, exam's regulatory framework. The challenge lies in accurately identifying the most appropriate defense based on the specific facts presented, understanding the legal and ethical implications of each potential defense, and applying them within the context of public entity operations. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between legally sound defenses and those that are inapplicable or ethically questionable. The correct approach involves recognizing that the municipality's actions, while potentially leading to harm, were undertaken in good faith to address a known hazard based on established procedures and available resources. This aligns with the defense of discretionary function immunity, which protects governmental entities from liability for acts or omissions involving policymaking or the exercise of judgment or discretion. This defense is rooted in the principle that public officials should not be unduly hampered in their decision-making processes by the threat of litigation. Applying this defense requires demonstrating that the decision was indeed discretionary, based on a balancing of competing factors, and not merely a ministerial execution of a duty. The regulatory framework for public entities often implicitly or explicitly supports such immunity to allow for effective governance. An incorrect approach would be to assert the defense of comparative negligence. While comparative negligence can reduce a plaintiff's recovery if their own negligence contributed to their injuries, it does not absolve the municipality of its own potential negligence. In this scenario, the focus is on whether the municipality's actions themselves were negligent or protected by immunity, not on the plaintiff's comparative fault. Relying solely on this defense would fail to address the core issue of the municipality's liability. Another incorrect approach would be to claim assumption of risk. This defense requires the plaintiff to have voluntarily and knowingly encountered a known risk. While the public may be aware of general risks associated with public spaces, it does not automatically mean they have assumed the risk of specific negligent acts or omissions by the municipality that create or exacerbate those risks. This defense is typically narrowly construed and would likely not apply if the municipality's actions created a hazard beyond what a reasonable person would anticipate. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to argue for governmental immunity based solely on the fact that the entity is a public body. While governmental immunity exists, it is not absolute and is subject to specific exceptions and limitations. Simply being a public entity does not automatically shield it from all negligence claims. A specific, legally recognized defense, such as discretionary function immunity, must be established based on the nature of the act or omission. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough review of the facts, identification of potential legal defenses, and an assessment of the applicability of each defense based on established legal principles and the specific regulatory environment governing public entities. This includes consulting with legal counsel to ensure the chosen defense is legally sound and ethically defensible, and that it aligns with the principles of good governance and risk management. Question 6. The investigation demonstrates that a public entity's proposed new public safety initiative, designed to enhance community preparedness for natural disasters, has been developed with a primary focus on cost efficiency in its rollout. However, preliminary community feedback suggests that the proposed distribution of resources and educational materials may inadvertently favor communities with higher socioeconomic status, potentially leaving lower-income neighborhoods with less access to critical preparedness information and resources. As the Associate in Risk Management Public Entities, ARMP, what is the most appropriate decision-making framework to address this potential disparity while ensuring the initiative's overall effectiveness and compliance with equal protection principles? Option A. Focus solely on the technical aspects of disaster preparedness, assuming that the inherent value of the initiative will naturally benefit all community members regardless of their socioeconomic background. Option B. Immediately halt the rollout and initiate a comprehensive review of the initiative's design and implementation plan, actively seeking input from representatives of all socioeconomic groups to ensure equitable access to preparedness resources and information. Option C. Proceed with the rollout as planned, but instruct staff to make informal efforts to assist underserved communities when possible, relying on existing community organizations to bridge any resource gaps. Option D. Prioritize the cost efficiency of the initiative as originally planned, assuming that any disparities will be addressed through separate, future community outreach programs. The correct answer is D. Prioritize the cost efficiency of the initiative as originally planned, assuming that any disparities will be addressed through separate, future community outreach programs. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a public entity risk manager to balance the need for efficient resource allocation with the fundamental legal and ethical obligation to provide equal protection under the law. Risk manager must navigate potential biases, both conscious and unconscious, that could lead to disparate treatment of different groups within the community. Failure to do so can result in significant legal liability, reputational damage, and erosion of public trust. The correct approach involves a systematic and objective evaluation of the risk management program's impact on all segments of the public, ensuring that no group is unfairly burdened or excluded. This requires a proactive commitment to identifying and mitigating potential discriminatory effects, even when they are not immediately apparent. Specifically, the risk manager should engage in a thorough review of program design, implementation, and outcomes, utilizing data and feedback from diverse community stakeholders. This aligns with the core principles of equal protection, which mandate that government actions treat similarly situated individuals alike and prohibit arbitrary or invidious discrimination. The risk manager's duty is to uphold these principles by ensuring that risk management strategies do not create or perpetuate inequalities. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost-effectiveness, without considering the equitable distribution of benefits and burdens, would fail to meet the equal protection standard. Such an approach risks prioritizing financial efficiency over fairness, potentially leading to a disproportionate impact on vulnerable or marginalized populations. This is a regulatory and ethical failure because it neglects the fundamental mandate to treat all individuals with dignity and respect, and to avoid discriminatory outcomes. Another incorrect approach that relies on historical practices or assumptions about certain groups without current, objective data is also professionally unacceptable. This can perpetuate outdated stereotypes and lead to decisions that are not based on current needs or realities, thereby violating the principle of equal protection by treating individuals differently based on unfounded generalizations rather than their actual circumstances. A third incorrect approach that involves making decisions based on anecdotal evidence or the opinions of a select few stakeholders, without a broader, inclusive consultation process, is also flawed. This can lead to a skewed understanding of community needs and can inadvertently exclude or disadvantage certain groups, failing to uphold the spirit of equal protection which demands fair consideration for all. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a framework that prioritizes fairness and equity. This framework includes 1. Identifying the potential impact of risk management decisions on different demographic groups. 2. Gathering data and feedback from a diverse range of stakeholders. 3. Objectively analyzing this information to identify any potential disparities or discriminatory effects. 4. Developing and implementing strategies to mitigate identified risks to equal protection. 5. Regularly reviewing and evaluating the effectiveness of these strategies. This systematic process ensures that decisions are not only legally compliant, but also ethically sound and promote the well-being of the entire community. Question 7. During the evaluation of a citizen complaint against a municipal police department, a risk manager reviews an incident report detailing an officer's actions during a traffic stop. The report indicates the officer, after issuing a warning for a minor infraction, became verbally aggressive and, without apparent provocation, forcibly removed the driver from the vehicle, causing the driver to stumble and scrape their arm. Officer then proceeded to search the vehicle without the driver's consent or probable cause. The risk manager must determine the primary tort classification to guide the subsequent investigation and potential claims management strategy. Option A. The incident should be classified as a regulatory violation, focusing solely on departmental policy breaches rather than legal tort classifications. Option B. The incident should be classified as an error in judgment, which is a distinct category from tort liability and requires a different response. Option C. The incident should be classified as negligence, as the officer was performing official duties and any harm sustained was an unintended consequence of the stop. Option D. The incident should be classified as an intentional tort, specifically battery and potentially false imprisonment, due to the officer's volitional act of forcibly removing the driver and the deliberate nature of the vehicle search without legal justification. The correct answer is D. The incident should be classified as an intentional tort, specifically battery and potentially false imprisonment, due to the officer's volitional act of forcibly removing the driver and the deliberate nature of the vehicle search without legal justification. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires distinguishing between negligence and intentional torts within the context of public entity operations, specifically concerning the actions of a law enforcement officer. Misclassifying an intentional tort as simple negligence can lead to significant legal and financial repercussions for the public entity, including potentially higher damages, loss of sovereign immunity defenses, and reputational harm. The core difficulty lies in assessing the officer's state of mind and intent at the time of the incident, which is crucial for determining liability under intentional tort law. The correct approach involves recognizing that the officer's actions, as described, suggest a deliberate disregard for the individual's rights, potentially constituting an intentional tort such as battery or false imprisonment, rather than mere carelessness. This approach aligns with the principles of tort law that differentiate between unintentional harm, negligence, and harm caused by a volitional act with intent to cause harm or with substantial certainty that harm will result. For public entities, understanding this distinction is vital for proper risk management, including accurate claims handling, appropriate insurance coverage, and effective training to prevent such incidents. Regulatory frameworks governing public entities often have specific provisions or immunities that may apply differently to intentional torts versus negligence. For instance, many jurisdictions limit or preclude sovereign immunity for intentional torts committed by public employees, making accurate classification paramount for defense strategy and potential liability. An incorrect approach would be to automatically categorize the incident as negligence solely because it occurred during the course of official duties. This fails to consider the officer's intent, which is the defining element of an intentional tort. Ethically and regulatorily, public entities are expected to uphold the law and protect citizens from unlawful actions by their employees. Treating an intentional act as negligence undermines this responsibility and can lead to inadequate investigation and defense. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the incident without a thorough investigation into the officer's intent. This neglects the duty of care owed by the public entity to its citizens and bypasses established legal processes for addressing alleged wrongdoing. Such an approach can expose the entity to further legal challenges and sanctions for failing to properly investigate and respond to potential tortious conduct. A third incorrect approach is to assume that any action taken by a law enforcement officer, regardless of intent, is automatically protected by qualified immunity or other defenses applicable to negligence. While qualified immunity exists, it is not a blanket protection and is often scrutinized more closely in cases involving intentional misconduct. Failing to investigate the intent behind the actions can lead to an improper application of such defenses. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multi-step approach. 1. Gather all facts. Obtain a comprehensive account of the incident from all available sources, including witness statements, incident reports, and any available evidence. 2. Analyze the actor's intent. Critically assess the actions of the public employee to determine if there was intent to cause harm or if the harm was a substantial certainty resulting from the employee's volitional act. This may involve reviewing training records, departmental policies, and the employee's past conduct. 3. Consult legal counsel. Engage legal experts specializing in public entity liability and tort law to provide guidance on the classification of the tort and potential defenses. 4. Review relevant regulations and case law. Ensure that the assessment is grounded in the specific regulatory framework and judicial precedents applicable to the public entity's jurisdiction. 5. Determine appropriate risk management response. Based on the classification of the tort, implement appropriate strategies for claims management, insurance notification, and potential corrective actions, such as enhanced training or disciplinary measures. Question 8. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood and high impact rating for employment practices liability claims stemming from alleged discrimination and harassment within the public entity. The risk manager has received a formal complaint from an employee alleging discriminatory treatment by a supervisor. What is the most appropriate initial course of action for the risk manager to take? Option A. Initiate a formal, documented investigation into the allegations, ensuring impartiality and preserving all relevant evidence, while simultaneously consulting with the entity's legal counsel specializing in public sector employment law. Option B. Place the complaint in a pending file and revisit it in a few weeks after the current workload subsides. Option C. Advise the complainant to pursue the matter through informal channels with their department head, as this is often the quickest resolution. Option D. Immediately suspend the accused supervisor, pending a full review of the complaint to prevent further alleged incidents. The correct answer is A. Initiate a formal, documented investigation into the allegations, ensuring impartiality and preserving all relevant evidence, while simultaneously consulting with the entity's legal counsel specializing in public sector employment law. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a public entity risk manager to balance the immediate need to address a potential employment practices liability claim with the long-term implications of their response on employee morale, legal standing, and the entity's reputation. The risk manager must navigate complex legal and ethical considerations under the specific regulatory framework governing public entities, which often involves unique procedural requirements and oversight. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective investigation of the allegations, ensuring all relevant parties are interviewed and documentation is preserved, and then consulting with legal counsel specializing in public entity employment law. This approach is correct because it aligns with the principles of due process and fairness inherent in public sector employment, and it is mandated by regulations that require public entities to follow established procedures when investigating employee grievances and potential legal claims. Prompt and thorough investigation, coupled with expert legal advice, is crucial for mitigating liability, ensuring compliance with employment laws such as Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, as applicable to public entities, and maintaining the integrity of the entity's HR processes. This proactive stance demonstrates a commitment to lawful and ethical employment practices. An incorrect approach of immediately terminating the accused employee without a proper investigation is ethically and regulatorily flawed. This bypasses due process, potentially violates employment contracts or collective bargaining agreements, and exposes the entity to wrongful termination lawsuits. It also fails to gather necessary facts, which could lead to an uninformed and legally indefensible decision. Another incorrect approach of ignoring the complaint or delaying the investigation indefinitely is also professionally unacceptable. This inaction can be interpreted as a failure to provide a safe and fair work environment, potentially violating the entity's duty of care and leading to further legal claims, including hostile work environment allegations. Such delays can also prejudice the investigation by allowing evidence to be lost or memories to fade, weakening the entity's defense. A third incorrect approach of relying solely on informal resolutions without documenting the process or consulting legal counsel is risky. While informal resolutions can be effective, a lack of formal documentation and legal review can leave the entity vulnerable if the issue escalates. It may also fail to address systemic issues that contributed to the complaint, leading to recurring problems and increased liability. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a systematic and compliant response. This involves 1. Acknowledging the complaint promptly and initiating a formal investigation process. 2. Ensuring the investigation is impartial, thorough, and documented. 3. Engaging legal counsel early to guide the investigation and advise on legal obligations and potential liabilities. 4. Considering the specific employment laws and regulations applicable to public entities. 5. Maintaining confidentiality to the extent possible while ensuring a fair process for all involved. 6. Documenting all steps taken and decisions made. Question 9. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a municipality can significantly reduce its annual insurance premium by lowering its commercial general liability (CGL) coverage limits. However, the municipality has recently experienced an increase in slip and fall claims due to aging infrastructure and is considering several new public recreational facilities that could increase its exposure to liability. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework and fiduciary duties of a public entity when determining CGL coverage limits? Option A. Maintain the current CGL coverage limits, despite the potential for cost savings, without reevaluating the entity's evolving risk profile. Option B. Adopt the CGL coverage limits of a neighboring municipality that has a similar population size, without further investigation into specific exposures. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment of current and projected exposures, review historical loss data, and consider industry benchmarks for similar public entities to determine appropriate coverage limits that balance protection with cost-effectiveness. Option D. Select the lowest premium option that meets any absolute statutory minimum coverage requirements, assuming the cost savings are paramount. Correct answer is D. Select the lowest premium option that meets any absolute statutory minimum coverage requirements, assuming the cost savings are paramount. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because public entities must balance the cost of comprehensive insurance coverage with the potential financial impact of uninsured liabilities, all while adhering to specific statutory requirements and fiduciary duties. The decision regarding the appropriate commercial general liability (CGL) coverage limits requires a deep understanding of the entity's risk profile, potential claims frequency and severity, and the legal and regulatory landscape governing public entities. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the entity's specific exposures, historical loss data, and projected future risks, coupled with an analysis of statutory minimums and industry best practices for similar public entities. This approach is right because it directly addresses the fiduciary responsibility to protect public assets by ensuring adequate coverage without incurring unnecessary premium costs. Regulatory justification stems from the principle of prudent financial management and the obligation to act in the best interest of the public, which includes safeguarding against catastrophic financial loss. Ethical justification lies in the transparency and accountability required of public officials in managing taxpayer funds. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the lowest available premium fails to adequately assess risk and may leave the entity exposed to significant financial shortfalls in the event of a large claim. This is a regulatory failure because it neglects the duty to provide sufficient protection, and an ethical failure due to imprudent stewardship of public resources. Another incorrect approach that selects coverage limits based on a competitor's policy without considering the unique exposures of the entity is also flawed. This is a regulatory failure as it fails to perform due diligence specific to the entity's circumstances, and an ethical failure in not applying a tailored, risk-based decision-making process. Finally, an approach that ignores potential future liability trends and focuses only on past claims data is insufficient. This is a regulatory failure because it does not account for evolving risks, and an ethical failure in not proactively managing emerging threats to the entity's financial stability. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive risk assessment, followed by an evaluation of available insurance products and their respective coverage limits. This should be informed by legal and regulatory requirements, historical data, and projections of future risk. The final decision should be documented, clearly articulating the rationale and demonstrating how the chosen coverage balances risk mitigation with cost-effectiveness, thereby fulfilling fiduciary and statutory obligations. Question 10. Comparative studies suggest that the effectiveness of risk monitoring and review within public entities can be significantly enhanced through varied methodologies. Considering the Associated Risk Management Public Entities (ARMP) framework, which of the following approaches to risk monitoring and review is most likely to foster a robust and adaptive risk management program for a municipal government? Option A. Relying primarily on the findings and recommendations from the Internal Audit Department's annual risk assessment report to guide all subsequent risk management activities. Option B. Implementing a continuous monitoring system that integrates feedback from departmental staff, operational managers, and external service providers, supplemented by periodic thematic reviews of emerging risk areas. Option C. Limiting the review process to only those risks that have historically resulted in significant financial losses for the entity. Option D. Conducting a comprehensive review annually, focusing on strategic risks identified by senior leadership, with findings reported directly to the governing board. The correct answer is D. Conducting a comprehensive review annually, focusing on strategic risks identified by senior leadership, with findings reported directly to the governing board. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a public entity risk manager to balance the need for continuous improvement in risk management with the practical constraints of resource allocation and stakeholder engagement. The effectiveness of risk monitoring and review is directly tied to its ability to adapt to evolving risks and organizational needs, necessitating a proactive and inclusive approach. Careful judgment is required to select a review methodology that is both comprehensive and efficient, ensuring that valuable resources are utilized effectively without compromising the integrity of the risk management process. The correct approach involves a structured, multifaceted review process that actively incorporates feedback from a diverse range of stakeholders. This methodology is right because it aligns with the principles of good governance and accountability inherent in public sector risk management. Specifically, it supports compliance with guidelines that emphasize transparency, stakeholder participation, and the continuous improvement of risk management frameworks. By systematically gathering input from various departments and external partners, the risk manager can identify emerging risks, assess the effectiveness of existing controls, and ensure that the risk management strategy remains relevant and responsive to the entity's objectives and the public interest. This approach fosters a culture of risk awareness and shared responsibility, which is crucial for effective risk mitigation in public entities. An approach that relies solely on internal audit reports for review is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a narrow perspective that overlooks the dynamic nature of risks and the valuable insights held by those directly involved in operational activities. Internal audit, while important, typically focuses on compliance and control effectiveness from a specific, often retrospective, viewpoint. It may not capture the nuances of emerging threats or the practical challenges faced by frontline staff, leading to an incomplete risk assessment and potentially ineffective mitigation strategies. This approach risks non-compliance with principles of comprehensive risk assessment and stakeholder engagement, an approach that prioritizes only high-impact, low-probability risks for review is also professionally unacceptable. While these risks are critical, an exclusive focus neglects the cumulative effect of lower-impact risks, which can collectively pose a significant threat to an entity's operations and service delivery. Public entities often face a multitude of operational, financial, and reputational risks that, while individually manageable, can create systemic vulnerabilities when not adequately monitored. This selective review process can lead to blind spots and a failure to address systemic weaknesses, potentially violating the duty to manage all material risks effectively. An approach that limits review to annual, top-down assessments without ongoing feedback mechanisms is professionally unacceptable. This rigid, infrequent approach fails to acknowledge that risks are not static. The public sector operates in a constantly changing environment, with new legislation, technological advancements, and evolving public expectations. An annual review is unlikely to detect and respond to emerging risks in a timely manner, leaving the entity vulnerable to unforeseen events. This lack of agility and responsiveness can lead to significant financial losses, reputational damage, and a failure to meet public service obligations, contravening the fundamental principles of proactive risk management. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a continuous cycle of risk identification, assessment, monitoring, and review. This process should be iterative and adaptive, incorporating feedback from all relevant stakeholders, including operational staff, senior management, governing bodies, and where appropriate, external partners and the public. The risk manager should establish clear metrics for monitoring risk indicators and control effectiveness, and regularly scheduled reviews should be supplemented by ad hoc assessments triggered by significant events or changes in the operating environment. This holistic and dynamic approach ensures that risk management remains a living process, integral to the entity's strategic objectives and operational resilience. Question 11. The monitoring system demonstrates a statistically significant increase in reported slip, trip, and fall incidents within a public park managed by a municipal entity. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the principles of risk analysis and evaluation for a public entity, considering the need for defensible decision-making and adherence to public safety mandates? Option A. Immediately allocate additional budget for increased landscaping and groundskeeping services across all park areas to proactively address potential environmental hazards. Option B. Issue a general public advisory warning about the increased risk of slips, trips, and falls in the park, without further investigation into specific causes. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive review of park maintenance logs, incident reports, and visitor feedback to identify common themes and potential contributing factors, followed by a targeted risk assessment of identified high-risk areas or activities. Option D. Reclassify the increase in incidents as a temporary fluctuation and defer any in-depth analysis until a more substantial trend emerges over a longer period. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive review of park maintenance logs, incident reports, and visitor feedback to identify common themes and potential contributing factors, followed by a targeted risk assessment of identified high-risk areas or activities. Explanation. The monitoring system demonstrates a significant increase in reported slip, trip, and fall incidents within a public park managed by a municipal entity. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the risk manager to not only identify the trend, but also to determine the most effective and compliant method for evaluating the underlying causes and implementing appropriate controls. The challenge lies in balancing immediate response needs with the requirement for thorough, defensible analysis that adheres to public sector risk management principles and relevant regulations. The public entity's duty of care to its citizens and visitors necessitates a proactive and systematic approach to safety. The correct approach involves a multifaceted risk analysis that moves beyond simply acknowledging the incident increase. It requires a systematic evaluation of contributing factors, such as environmental conditions, e.g., poor lighting, uneven surfaces, inadequate drainage, maintenance practices, user behavior, and the effectiveness of existing signage or warnings. This approach aligns with established risk management frameworks, which emphasize identifying hazards, assessing risks, likelihood, and impact, and developing control measures. For public entities, this is further reinforced by principles of public accountability and the need to demonstrate due diligence in protecting public safety, often guided by state or local ordinances related to public property maintenance and safety standards. The goal is to understand the root causes to implement sustainable solutions, rather than merely addressing symptoms. An incorrect approach would be to immediately implement a costly, broad-based solution without a proper analysis of the root causes. For instance, simply increasing the frequency of groundskeeping without investigating specific problem areas or identifying recurring issues would be inefficient and potentially ineffective. This fails to meet the regulatory expectation of a reasoned and evidence-based approach to risk mitigation. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the increase as a statistical anomaly without further investigation. This demonstrates a failure in due diligence and a disregard for potential systemic issues that could lead to more severe incidents or legal liability. Relying solely on anecdotal evidence or the opinions of a few staff members, without a structured data collection and analysis process, also represents a failure to adhere to professional risk management standards, which demand objective and comprehensive evaluation. Professionals should approach such situations by first confirming the data's accuracy and completeness. Then they should initiate a structured risk assessment process, which typically involves hazard identification, risk analysis, considering both likelihood and severity, and risk evaluation. This evaluation should inform the selection and implementation of appropriate risk control measures, followed by ongoing monitoring and review. The decision-making process should be guided by the entity's risk management policy, relevant statutory requirements, and best practices in public sector risk management, ensuring that actions are proportionate, effective, and defensible. Question 12. Investigation of a claim filed by a citizen alleging damages due to a faulty sidewalk repair by the municipality reveals that the claim falls within the general scope of bodily injury as defined in the policy. However, the municipality's risk manager notes that the repair was performed by a private contractor hired by the city. Which aspect of the insuring agreement is most critical for determining coverage in this situation? Option A, the subrogation clause. Option B, the notification period for reporting claims. Option C, the definition of insured and whether the private contractor is considered an additional insured. Option D, the policy's premium calculation methodology. The correct answer is C, the definition of insured and whether the private contractor is considered an additional insured. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because the insuring agreement, a core component of any insurance policy, defines the scope of coverage. Misinterpreting or misapplying its terms can lead to significant financial exposure for the public entity and potential claims against risk management professionals. The challenge lies in accurately discerning the intent of the language within the insuring agreement and applying it to the specific facts of a claim, especially when the language might be ambiguous or when novel situations arise. Careful judgment is required to ensure that coverage is provided as intended by the policy and that the public entity is protected from unforeseen liabilities, while also adhering to the principles of good faith and fair dealing. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the insuring agreement's language, considering its plain meaning, any relevant definitions within the policy, and applicable case law or regulatory interpretations within the jurisdiction governing the ARMP exam. This approach prioritizes understanding the contractual obligations and ensuring that claims decisions align with the policy's intent and legal requirements. Specifically, for a public entity. This means understanding how the insuring agreement addresses risks unique to governmental operations, such as civil rights claims, inverse condemnation, or liability arising from the performance of governmental functions. Adherence to the insuring agreement's terms is paramount, as it forms the basis of the insurer's promise to indemnify. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the claimant's interpretation of the insuring agreement without independent analysis. This fails to uphold the contractual obligations and the risk manager's duty to the public entity and its insurer. Another incorrect approach is to assume coverage exists without a clear basis in the insuring agreement, potentially leading to the payment of claims that are not covered, and thus exposing the public entity to financial loss. Furthermore, ignoring policy exclusions or limitations that are explicitly part of the insuring agreement, even if they seem to limit coverage, would be a failure to adhere to the contract. Each of these incorrect approaches violates the fundamental principle of contract interpretation and the professional duty to manage risk prudently and in accordance with policy terms. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a meticulous examination of the insuring agreement. This involves identifying the peril insured against, the property or person covered, and any conditions or exclusions. When faced with ambiguity, seeking clarification from legal counsel or the insurer is a critical step. The decision-making process should be documented, demonstrating a clear rationale based on the policy language and relevant legal or regulatory guidance. This ensures accountability and provides a basis for review if disputes arise. Question 13. The performance metrics show that the public entity's current debt portfolio carries a higher than average interest rate compared to recent municipal bond issuances. The finance director is considering refinancing a significant portion of this debt to capitalize on the current lower interest rate environment. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the principles of responsible risk management for a public entity in this situation? Option A. Refinance only the debt with the highest interest rates without considering the overall impact on the entity's debt structure or future borrowing capacity. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that analyzes the potential benefits and drawbacks of refinancing, including an evaluation of interest rate volatility, the impact on the entity's debt service coverage ratios, and compliance with all applicable state and federal regulations governing debt management. Option C. Immediately proceed with refinancing to secure the lower interest rates and reduce immediate debt service costs, assuming the current market conditions will persist. Option D. Rely solely on the advice of the investment bank proposing the refinancing, without independent verification or a thorough internal review of the proposed terms and their long-term implications. The correct answer is C. Immediately proceed with refinancing to secure the lower interest rates and reduce immediate debt service costs, assuming the current market conditions will persist. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a public entity to balance its fiduciary duty to taxpayers with the strategic imperative of managing its debt obligations effectively. The decision to refinance debt involves significant financial implications, and a failure to conduct a thorough risk assessment can lead to increased costs, reduced financial flexibility, and potential reputational damage. The ARMP designation emphasizes the importance of understanding public sector risk management, which includes navigating complex financial decisions within a strict regulatory and ethical framework. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that evaluates the potential benefits and drawbacks of refinancing against the entity's current financial position, future revenue projections, and the prevailing economic climate. This includes analyzing interest rate volatility, the impact on the entity's debt service coverage ratios, and any covenants or restrictions associated with existing debt. Regulatory compliance is paramount. Public entities must adhere to state and local laws governing debt issuance and management, as well as any federal regulations that may apply. Ethical considerations demand transparency and a demonstrable commitment to acting in the best financial interest of the public. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with refinancing solely based on a perceived immediate reduction in interest payments without a thorough analysis of long-term implications. This could lead to a situation where the entity is locked into unfavorable terms or incurs significant prepayment penalties, ultimately costing more over the life of the debt. Another incorrect approach is to disregard the impact of refinancing on the entity's overall financial health and its ability to fund essential public services. This demonstrates a failure to uphold the fiduciary duty to taxpayers. Furthermore, failing to consult with legal counsel and financial advisors to ensure compliance with all applicable regulations and best practices represents a significant ethical and professional lapse. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with clearly defining the objectives of the refinancing. This should be followed by a detailed risk assessment, considering both quantitative and qualitative factors. Engaging relevant stakeholders, including financial advisors, legal counsel, and relevant government oversight bodies, is crucial. The decision should be documented thoroughly, outlining the rationale, the risks considered, and the mitigation strategies employed. Continuous monitoring of the debt portfolio post-refinancing is also essential to ensure ongoing alignment with the entity's financial goals. Question 14. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a new cybersecurity protocol for a municipal government's data systems would incur significant upfront costs for hardware, software, and training. However, the potential benefits include a substantial reduction in the likelihood of costly data breaches, protection of sensitive citizen information, and the avoidance of reputational damage, which approach best aligns with the principles of effective risk management for public entities. Option A. Implement only the most cost-effective components of the protocol that offer immediate, measurable financial savings, and postpone other aspects to a future budget cycle. Option B. Prioritize the implementation of the protocol because the long-term benefits of protecting citizen data and maintaining public trust outweigh the immediate financial outlay, even if some benefits are difficult to quantify financially. Option C. Defer the implementation of the protocol, focusing only on immediate cost savings from other risk management areas, as the exact financial return on the cybersecurity investment is uncertain. Option D. Seek to implement the protocol only if the projected financial savings from preventing breaches directly offset the total implementation costs within the current fiscal year. The correct answer is B. Prioritize the implementation of the protocol because the long-term benefits of protecting citizen data and maintaining public trust outweigh the immediate financial outlay, even if some benefits are difficult to quantify financially. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for public entities, balancing the immediate financial implications of a risk management initiative against its long-term benefits, particularly when those benefits are not easily quantifiable in monetary terms. The professional challenge lies in adhering to regulatory requirements for prudent financial management and effective risk mitigation, while also demonstrating accountability to taxpayers and stakeholders. This requires a nuanced understanding of cost-benefit analysis beyond simple financial returns, incorporating qualitative factors, and aligning with the guiding principles of public sector risk management. The correct approach involves a comprehensive cost-benefit analysis that incorporates both tangible and intangible benefits, aligning with the principles of effective public sector risk management as outlined by relevant U.S. regulatory frameworks for public entities. This approach recognizes that, while direct financial savings are important, the prevention of reputational damage, improved public safety, and enhanced service delivery are critical, albeit harder to monetize, benefits that justify the investment. The regulatory justification stems from the expectation that public entities will act in the best interest of the public, which includes safeguarding against significant risks and ensuring the efficient use of public funds, even if the full value of risk mitigation is not immediately apparent in financial statements. Ethical considerations also mandate a proactive approach to risk management that prioritizes public well-being and trust. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate, quantifiable cost savings fails to acknowledge the broader mandate of public entities. This approach is ethically deficient because it may lead to underinvestment in critical risk mitigation measures that protect the public from potentially catastrophic, though less predictable, losses. It also risks violating regulatory expectations that public entities manage risks comprehensively, not just those with easily calculable financial impacts. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes the lowest upfront cost without considering the long-term effectiveness or potential for future liabilities is also professionally unsound. This approach is problematic because it can lead to the selection of inadequate solutions that may result in higher costs down the line due to recurring incidents, increased insurance premiums, or the need for more extensive remediation. This demonstrates a failure to exercise due diligence and a lack of foresight, which are essential for responsible risk management in the public sector. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach to cost-benefit analysis that explicitly defines all relevant costs and benefits, both tangible and intangible. It requires engaging stakeholders to identify and value non-monetary benefits, such as improved public perception or enhanced operational resilience. Furthermore, it necessitates a thorough understanding of applicable regulations and ethical standards that guide public sector financial management and risk mitigation. Professionals should document their analysis comprehensively, clearly articulating the rationale for their recommendations, especially when intangible benefits play a significant role in the decision. Question 15. The review process indicates that a long-standing, trusted vendor has submitted a proposal for a critical public safety system upgrade. While the vendor is well known and has a proven track record with the public entity, the standard procurement policy requires a formal competitive bidding process for all contracts exceeding a certain threshold. The risk manager is aware that bypassing this process could expedite the upgrade, but also recognizes the potential ethical and governance implications. Which of the following actions best aligns with the principles of ethics and governance for public entities? Option A. Inform the vendor that while their proposal is appreciated, the entity must explore other options due to policy requirements, without initiating a formal review of their current submission. Option B. Initiate a formal review of the vendor's proposal and the procurement process, ensuring all policy requirements are met, even if it means a slight delay in the upgrade. Option C. Recommend an emergency procurement exception to bypass the standard bidding process, citing the critical nature of the system upgrade. Option D. Proceed with awarding the contract to the known vendor to expedite the critical system upgrade, given their established relationship and performance. The correct answer is B. Initiate a formal review of the vendor's proposal and the procurement process, ensuring all policy requirements are met, even if it means a slight delay in the upgrade. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for a service with the ethical obligation to ensure fair and transparent procurement processes, particularly within the public sector where accountability and public trust are paramount. The risk manager must navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure adherence to established governance principles. The correct approach involves initiating a formal review of the vendor's qualifications and the procurement process, even though the vendor is known to the public entity. This upholds the principles of fairness, transparency, and accountability mandated by public entity governance frameworks. Specifically, it aligns with the ethical duty to avoid even the appearance of impropriety, and to ensure that all contracts are awarded based on merit and adherence to established procedures, rather than personal relationships or expediency. This approach prioritizes the integrity of the public entity's operations and protects against potential legal challenges or public criticism. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the vendor without a formal review simply because they are known. This bypasses essential due diligence and procurement protocols, creating a significant ethical and regulatory risk. It could be perceived as favoritism or a conflict of interest, undermining public trust and potentially violating procurement laws or internal policies designed to ensure competitive and equitable bidding. Another incorrect approach would be to delay the decision indefinitely due to the perceived complexity of reviewing a known vendor. Thoroughness is important. An indefinite delay without a clear plan for resolution can disrupt essential public services and create operational inefficiencies, which is also contrary to the public entity's mission and the risk manager's duty to facilitate effective operations within ethical boundaries. A further incorrect approach would be to unilaterally award the contract to the known vendor to expedite the process, without any form of review or justification. This is a direct violation of procurement ethics and likely regulatory requirements for public entities, as it completely disregards the need for a fair and competitive process, even if the outcome might be the same. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of the situation against established ethical codes and regulatory requirements. This includes identifying potential conflicts of interest, assessing the integrity of existing processes, and determining the most appropriate course of action that upholds transparency, fairness, and accountability. When in doubt, Consulting with legal counsel or a compliance officer is a critical step to ensure adherence to all applicable rules and ethical standards. Question 16. Market research demonstrates that public entities are increasingly facing complex liability exposures related to data breaches and cyber attacks. A public entity has experienced a significant data breach affecting citizen personal information. The entity's general liability policy contains a standard exclusion for electronic data loss. The risk manager must determine if coverage is available for the costs associated with the breach, such as notification expenses, credit monitoring services, and potential legal defense. Which approach best guides the risk manager in making this coverage determination? Option A. Interpret the electronic data loss exclusion narrowly to avoid increasing the entity's potential for future premium increases, even if the facts suggest a broader interpretation might be warranted. Option B. Review the specific policy language, including any endorsements that may modify or clarify the electronic data loss exclusion, and research relevant state statutes and case law interpreting similar exclusions in the context of public entity liabilities. Option C. Rely on the insurer's initial assessment that the electronic data loss exclusion clearly bars coverage for all breach-related costs. Option D. Make a coverage determination based on a general understanding of common cyber liability insurance policies, assuming the entity would have purchased separate cyber coverage if this was a significant risk. The correct answer is B. Review the specific policy language, including any endorsements that may modify or clarify the electronic data loss exclusion, and research relevant state statutes and case law interpreting similar exclusions in the context of public entity liabilities. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because determining coverage for public entities' unique risks requires a meticulous application of policy language, relevant statutes, and established case law. Public entities often face complex and evolving liabilities that may not fit neatly into standard insurance policy definitions. The risk manager must exercise careful judgment to ensure that coverage accurately reflects the entity's exposures, and that claims are handled in accordance with legal and contractual obligations, avoiding both underinsurance and overinsurance. Correct approach involves a thorough review of the specific policy language, including endorsements and exclusions, in conjunction with applicable state statutes and relevant case law that interprets similar coverage provisions for public entities. This method ensures that coverage determinations are grounded in the precise terms of the contract and the governing legal framework, aligning with the principles of good faith and fair dealing expected in insurance and risk management. Adherence to these specific legal and contractual parameters is paramount for accurate coverage decisions. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the insurer's initial interpretation without independent verification fails to uphold the risk manager's fiduciary duty to the public entity. This can lead to coverage denials for valid claims or the acceptance of coverage for risks not intended to be insured, potentially exposing the entity to significant financial loss. Such an approach neglects the critical responsibility of understanding and applying the policy's specific terms and conditions as they relate to the entity's unique circumstances. Another incorrect approach that focuses on expediency over accuracy, such as making a coverage determination based on a general understanding of similar public entity risks without consulting the specific policy and relevant legal precedents, is also professionally unacceptable. This can result in misinterpretations of coverage, leading to disputes and potential litigation. It bypasses the essential due diligence required to ensure that the coverage determination is legally sound and contractually appropriate. A third incorrect approach that prioritizes minimizing immediate premium costs by narrowly interpreting coverage, even when the entity's exposures suggest broader protection is warranted, is ethically and professionally flawed. This can leave the public entity inadequately protected against significant liabilities, contradicting the fundamental purpose of risk management, which is to safeguard the entity's financial stability and operational continuity. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured framework. First, clearly identify the risk exposure and the specific claim or situation requiring a coverage determination. Second, meticulously review the relevant insurance policy language, paying close attention to definitions, ensuring agreements, exclusions, and endorsements. Third, research and apply applicable state statutes and relevant case law that govern insurance contracts and public entity liability. Fourth, Consult with legal counsel and insurance experts when complex issues arise. Finally, document the entire decision-making process, including the rationale and supporting evidence, to ensure transparency and accountability. Question 17. Assessment of the post-disaster emergency management efforts of a municipal public entity. Which of the following approaches best exemplifies a commitment to continuous improvement and regulatory compliance in emergency preparedness? Option A. Developing a completely new emergency management plan from scratch, disregarding the existing plan and the recent event's operational experience. Option B. Conducting a thorough after-action review to identify strengths, weaknesses, and lessons learned, and subsequently updating emergency management plans and training based on these findings. Option C. Making minor, informal adjustments to operational procedures based on individual staff feedback without a systematic review of the overall emergency management plan. Option D. Immediately focusing all available resources on restoring essential public services without formal documentation or analysis of the emergency response. The correct answer is B. Conducting a thorough after-action review to identify strengths, weaknesses, and lessons learned, and subsequently updating emergency management plans and training based on these findings. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for public entities, balancing immediate operational needs with long-term resilience planning. The pressure to restore services quickly after a disaster can overshadow the critical need to evaluate and improve emergency management plans. Professional judgment is required to ensure that the response, while urgent, also serves as a learning opportunity to enhance future preparedness, adhering to both regulatory mandates and ethical obligations to the public. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves conducting a comprehensive after-action review that systematically analyzes the effectiveness of the existing emergency management plan, identifies gaps and areas for improvement, and incorporates lessons learned into revised protocols and training. This aligns with best practices in emergency management, which emphasize continuous improvement. For public entities in the U.S., this is often implicitly or explicitly supported by federal guidelines such as those from FEMA, which promote a cycle of preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation, all underpinned by robust evaluation and learning. Ethically, it demonstrates a commitment to public safety and efficient use of resources by preventing recurrence of identified failures. Incorrect approaches analysis. Focusing solely on immediate restoration of services without a formal review neglects the core principles of emergency management. This approach fails to identify systemic weaknesses in the plan, potentially leading to repeated failures in future events and a lack of accountability. It also disregards the regulatory expectation for public entities to maintain and improve their emergency preparedness capabilities. Prioritizing the development of a new, untested plan without evaluating the existing one is inefficient and potentially disruptive. It bypasses the valuable lessons that could be learned from the recent event and the current plan's performance, however flawed. This can lead to the creation of plans that do not address the actual challenges encountered or that introduce new, unforeseen problems. Implementing minor, ad hoc adjustments based on anecdotal feedback without a structured review process is insufficient. Such an approach lacks the rigor to identify root causes of issues and may only address superficial symptoms. It fails to provide a systematic basis for improvement and may not satisfy regulatory requirements for documented plan updates and training based on comprehensive evaluations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach post-disaster situations by first ensuring the immediate safety and well-being of the public. Following this, a structured process for evaluating the response and preparedness is essential. This involves initiating an after-action review, gathering data from all relevant stakeholders, analyzing the performance against established objectives and plans, and developing actionable recommendations. These recommendations should then be integrated into revised plans, training programs, and resource allocation decisions. This cyclical approach ensures that public entities learn from experience, adapt to evolving threats, and continuously enhance their capacity to protect citizens and critical infrastructure. Question 18. Upon reviewing the financial implications of a newly signed 5-year contract for essential public safety services, the risk manager needs to determine the appropriate accounting treatment under Generally Accepted Accounting Principles (GAAP) for public entities. The contract requires fixed annual payments, and the services will be rendered evenly over the 5-year period. Which accounting approach best reflects the principles of GAAP for this situation? Option A. Recognize the entire contract cost as an expenditure in the year the contract is signed. Option B. Recognize the annual payments as operating expenses in each of the 5 years the services are received. Option C. Capitalize the total contract cost as a prepaid expense and amortize it over the 5-year term. Option D. Classify the contract as a capital lease and record a long-term asset and liability. The correct answer is B. Recognize the annual payments as operating expenses in each of the 5 years the services are received. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a public entity risk manager to interpret and apply generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, to a complex financial transaction involving a long-term service contract. The challenge lies in accurately recognizing and reporting the financial impact of this contract, which can affect the entity's financial statements and its perceived financial health. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with GAAP, which is crucial for transparency, accountability, and maintaining public trust. The correct approach involves recognizing the lease payments as an operating expense over the term of the contract. This aligns with the principle of matching expenses with the period in which they are incurred, a core tenet of GAAP, specifically under current GAAP for governmental entities, GASP standards, which are the relevant framework for public entities in the U.S. Long-term service contracts that do not transfer ownership of an asset are generally treated as operating leases. This means the periodic payments are recognized as expenditures or expenses in the period they become due and payable. This approach ensures that the financial statements accurately reflect the cost of services consumed by the entity during each reporting period, providing a true and fair view of its financial performance. An incorrect approach would be to capitalize the entire cost of the contract as a prepaid expense and amortize it over the contract term. This is incorrect because GAAP for governmental entities typically treats service contracts that do not involve the transfer of ownership or the creation of a capital asset as operating expenses, not as assets that are prepaid. Capitalizing such an expense would overstate assets and understate expenses in the early periods of the contract, distorting the entity's financial position and results of operations. Another incorrect approach would be to recognize the entire contract cost as an expenditure in the year the contract was signed, regardless of the service delivery schedule. This violates the accrual basis of accounting, which is fundamental to GAAP. Accrual accounting requires expenses to be recognized when incurred, not necessarily when cash is paid or a contract is signed. This approach would misrepresent the entity's financial performance by creating a large expense in one period that is not matched by the consumption of services in that same period. A further incorrect approach would be to treat the contract as a capital lease. Capital lease accounting is generally reserved for arrangements that transfer the risks and rewards of ownership of an asset. A service contract, by its nature, typically provides for the performance of services rather than the acquisition of an asset. Misclassifying a service contract as a capital lease would lead to improper asset and liability recognition, significantly misstating the entity's balance sheet and potentially its debt covenants. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of the specific contract terms and a careful review of the applicable accounting standards, in this case, GASP pronouncements for public entities. Risk managers should consult with accounting professionals or auditors when there is uncertainty about the correct accounting treatment. The primary goal is to ensure financial reporting adheres to GAAP, promoting transparency and accurate representation of the entity's financial condition. Question 19. The audit findings indicate that a newly established unit within a municipal government, tasked with overseeing the implementation of new technology across various departments, may have been incorrectly categorized. While the unit's primary objective is to ensure the successful adoption and integration of new systems, thereby mitigating potential disruptions and data integrity issues, its activities have been broadly labeled as a risk management function for reporting purposes. Considering the specific definitions and requirements for public entities under relevant U.S. federal and state regulations governing risk management, which of the following best describes the appropriate classification and justification for this unit's activities? Option A. The unit's activities should be classified as a risk management function if its work directly contributes to the identification, assessment, and mitigation of potential negative impacts arising from the adoption of new technology, aligning with the principles of enterprise risk management for public entities. Option B. The unit's activities should be classified as an operational or project management function, as its core responsibilities focus on the successful deployment and integration of technology, rather than the broader strategic identification and management of enterprise-wide risks. Option C. The unit's activities should be classified as a risk management function if its budget allocation is significant, suggesting a high level of perceived risk by the entity. Option D. The unit's activities should be classified as a risk management function solely because it deals with the implementation of new systems, which inherently carry some level of risk. The correct answer is A. The unit's activities should be classified as a risk management function if its work directly contributes to the identification, assessment, and mitigation of potential negative impacts arising from the adoption of new technology, aligning with the principles of enterprise risk management for public entities. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential misclassification of a risk management function within a public entity, leading to an implementation challenge. This scenario is professionally challenging because the accurate definition and classification of risk management activities are foundational to compliance with regulatory frameworks and the effective allocation of resources. Misinterpreting these definitions can lead to non-compliance, inefficient program design, and ultimately, a failure to adequately protect public assets and interests. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the entity's risk management practices align with established definitions and regulatory expectations. The correct approach involves meticulously reviewing the specific duties and responsibilities of the function in question against the established definitions of core risk management activities, as outlined in relevant public entity risk management guidelines and regulations applicable to the ARMP exam jurisdiction. This requires a deep understanding of what constitutes a risk management function versus an operational or administrative task. Regulatory justification for this approach stems from the need for transparency, accountability, and adherence to standards set forth by governing bodies that oversee public sector risk management. Misclassifying a function can lead to improper reporting, inadequate oversight, and potential penalties if regulatory requirements are not met. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the title of the position or department. This is a regulatory and ethical failure because titles can be misleading and do not always reflect the actual scope of work. The regulatory framework emphasizes substance over form. Another incorrect approach is to assume that any activity involving potential loss is automatically a risk management function. This is a failure to adhere to specific definitions, as many operational roles involve managing day-to-day risks without being classified as a dedicated risk management function. The regulatory framework typically distinguishes between the identification and management of strategic, enterprise-level risks and the management of operational risks inherent in specific program delivery. Finally, an incorrect approach is to defer the decision to a less experienced staff member without proper oversight or consultation with subject matter experts. This represents a failure in due diligence and professional responsibility, potentially leading to the perpetuation of misclassification and its associated risks. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant regulatory definitions and guidelines. This should be followed by a detailed analysis of the function's actual activities, comparing them against these definitions. Consultation with legal counsel or experienced risk management professionals within the public sector is crucial when ambiguity exists. The process should be documented to demonstrate due diligence and provide a clear rationale for the classification decision. Question 20. Performance analysis shows that the public entity's employee benefit programs are experiencing escalating costs and a slight increase in employee complaints regarding coverage gaps. As the associate in risk management public entities, ARMP, what is the most appropriate risk assessment approach to address these issues? Option A. Focus solely on addressing employee complaints by expanding coverage in areas where complaints are most frequent, without a broader review of the entire benefit structure. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of all employee benefit plans to identify cost drivers, assess coverage adequacy against employee needs and regulatory requirements, and evaluate potential risks associated with plan administration and future cost trends. Option C. Immediately seek the lowest cost benefit plan options available in the market to reduce the entity's overall expenditure on employee benefits. Option D. Rely on the existing benefit provider's annual cost increase projections and implement minor adjustments to deductibles and co-pays to absorb the rising expenses. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive review of all employee benefit plans to identify cost drivers, assess coverage adequacy against employee needs and regulatory requirements, and evaluate potential risks associated with plan administration and future cost trends. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a public entity risk manager to balance the fiduciary duty to employees with the fiscal responsibilities of the entity, all while navigating a complex regulatory landscape. The risk manager must ensure that employee benefit programs are not only competitive and attractive, but also compliant with federal and state laws, and that the associated risks are adequately identified, assessed, and managed. The pressure to control costs can sometimes conflict with the need to provide robust benefits, necessitating a careful and informed approach to risk assessment. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of the public entity's existing employee benefit programs, including health insurance, retirement plans, and other voluntary benefits. This review should assess the adequacy of coverage, the cost-effectiveness of the plans, and their alignment with the entity's strategic goals and employee needs. Crucially, it must also identify and evaluate potential risks associated with these benefits, such as rising healthcare costs, changes in regulatory requirements, e.g., Affordable Care Act provisions, ERISA if applicable to certain plans, and the potential for litigation arising from benefit administration errors or misrepresentations. This proactive risk assessment allows for the development of mitigation strategies, such as exploring alternative plan designs, negotiating better rates with providers, or implementing robust internal controls for benefit administration. This aligns with the professional duty to manage risks effectively and ensure the long-term sustainability and compliance of employee benefit programs. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on cost reduction without a thorough risk assessment. This could lead to the selection of plans with inadequate coverage, potentially exposing employees to significant out-of-pocket expenses and increasing the entity's liability for claims that should have been covered. It also risks non-compliance with mandated benefits or reporting requirements, leading to penalties and legal challenges. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize employee satisfaction above all else, without considering the financial implications or regulatory constraints. While employee morale is important, offering benefits that are financially unsustainable or that violate legal requirements is not a responsible risk management strategy. This could lead to budget shortfalls, unfunded liabilities, and potential legal repercussions for the public entity. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to rely solely on historical data without considering emerging trends or future risks. Employee benefit landscapes, particularly healthcare, are dynamic. Failing to anticipate changes in legislation, market costs, or employee demographics can leave the entity unprepared for future challenges and unable to adapt its benefit programs effectively. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic risk management framework. This includes identifying all potential risks associated with employee benefits, analyzing their likelihood and impact, evaluating existing controls, and developing appropriate risk treatment strategies. Collaboration with legal counsel, benefits consultants, and internal stakeholders is essential to ensure a holistic and compliant approach. Regular review and monitoring of benefit programs and their associated risks are also critical to adapt to changing circumstances and maintain effective risk management.